Hello, I'm Elisa and welcome to Poetry in America Live. We had planned to do this event at the Sheen Center and to see all of your faces, but I am delighted to host you remotely, and I want to thank the Sheen Center for Thought and Culture, which is a project of the Archdiocese of New York. Thank them for hosting this virtual event. Poetry in America has been partnering with the Sheen Center since the fall of 2018. We did a live show at the Sheen about Elizabeth Bishop's poem One Art that featured Mary Chapin Carpenter and the poet Gregory Orr. And we have filmed interviews for many of our shows in the second season of our television series at the Sheen Center, including an episode featuring Yusuf Komunyakaa, the poet Yusuf Komunyakaa, one with John Hodgman on a poem by William Carlos Williams, an episode with Simon Doonan and Jonathan Adler and Bill T. Jones on a poem by Mark Doty. And we filmed for next season a poem by Sharon Olds, on a poem by Sharon Olds. We are so grateful for the partnership and friendship of the Sheen Center. I am Elisa and the host and director of Poetry in America, and I am so pleased to welcome the wonderfully distinguished guests I have with me here today. First, the celebrated and beautiful Melissa Errico, who is a Tony Award nominated singer, artist, and writer. Melissa has a long history with Sondheim. It began when he selected her to star as Dot in Sunday in the Park with George at the Kennedy Center. And then she starred in acclaimed New York productions as Clara in Passion and Leona in Do I Hear a Waltz? And she came out not too long ago with an all Sondheim album entitled Sondheim Sublime. We are so thrilled to have Melissa with us today to interpret Sondheim, both in conversation and with her gorgeous voice. We also have Tedd Firth, who accompanied Melissa on her performances today and is the accompanist on our TV episode. Tedd is a New York City-based musical director, pianist, and arranger, and he's worked with an extraordinary range of musicians, including Bernadette Peters and Michael Feinstein and Maureen McGovern and Leslie Uggams and many more. I'm so excited to have Tedd here to give us his perspective on Sondheim. And we have Adam Gopnik, who's been writing for The New Yorker since 1986. And during more than 30 years at the magazine, he has written an extraordinary amount. I know that I look forward with special appetite and gusto to any essay of Adam's I find in The New Yorker, whether he's writing about the future of liberalism or Paris Parks. Adam is also a person who works in the world of musical theater. He's written the libretto and lyrics for the musical comedy Our Table. And he actually, to be honest, when I decided to do a television episode on Stephen Sondheim, I invited Adam to come and just educate me. And he did, and so I'm thrilled to have him here. I do think that as we gather for what will be I think a very beautiful and uplifting afternoon of a rare kind that we're having on an early-ish summer day. at 3:00. We should, of course, remember what's going on outside. We celebrate Stephen Sondheim with these artists in the midst of an epidemic, pandemic of a kind most of us have never seen or even imagined, and with protests against racism going on in the cities all around us. And in light of that, we thought we would begin by thinking a little bit about musical theater and its attentiveness to the social world around us. And Adam selected something he wanted to read at the beginning of this event. Adam?
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here. We don't always think of the musical theater as being positioned politically, but it is in so many ways. You know, Sunday in the Park with George, which is the source of our amazing song, Finishing the Hat, that we're going to look at today, though not overtly political, is situated in a particular moment in French history, where right after the worst civil war in France, the Paris Commune. And one of the things that the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, Georges Seurat, among them, tried to deal with was the question of how you make art in a time of political ferment and political pain. And they're choosing to focus on not high rhetoric, but on ordinary pleasure. Was very much part of a politics of pleasure that they were prescribing for their time. A Little Night Music, another one of Sondheim's great musicals, speaking of pandemics, is situated right on the brink, on the edge of the abyss, in which the Spanish flu would come in and damage Sweden, the country in which it's set, more than maybe any other country in Europe. So we can't keep the real world out of the exquisite and sometimes fragile and perfectly precious world of musical theater. Steve Sondheim's great mentor, it's no secret, was Oscar Hammerstein, who wrote any number of great shows, most famously with Richard Rodgers around the time and after the Second World War. And Hammerstein's contribution to the American theater is manifold, but one part of it is that he had an intense social conscience. And in South Pacific, he wrote this lyric, which our good friend James Taylor not long ago revived on his record of American Standards, which he debuted at the Sheen Center just before the world fell in. And this is Hammerstein's lyric. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. That's part of the testament, part of the continuity of political engagement in the American musical theater, which Steve Sondheim is distinguished with overtly engaged musicals like Assassins and Pacific Overtures, but that is part of the texture, the warp and woof of even those musicals which seem to be about the pursuit of perfection in the arts.
Thank you so much, Adam. We are now going to turn to a performance Melissa will offer that has as its theme the pursuit of perfection in the arts. And we will, after we hear Melissa sing, we will discuss it with her. Oh, in fact, we may not be hearing Melissa sing right this second. So we will either be hearing Melissa sing right this second, or we will be hearing some of Melissa sing and a bit of our television episode. There was some suspense about that right up to the last minute. And so let's hear Melissa and go from there.
Studying the hat, entering the world of the hat, reaching through the world of the hat like a window, back to this one from that, studying a face stepping back to look at a face, leaves a little space in the way, like a window.
I think anybody who creates, be it software or a performance, particularly the people who create in solitude, that anybody knows what that feeling is like, where the hours disappear, the time just goes away. You look at the clock and you're like, where did that go? Because I was lost in creation.
George is constantly creating, which is why it's impossible to have a relationship with him, because everything disappears.
As George's dots begin to fill his canvas, his relationship with the woman named Dot dissolves.
Sondheim says someplace that this is the one song that he's willing to admit is a personal testament, is about himself. Because obviously, like any artist who does work, the work creates a barrier between yourself and the world. And at the same time, that barrier is where you live. It's the place where you're most at home.
So you're most alive.
Most fully alive when you're not fully alive, when in fact you're apart from the world.
Studying a face, stepping back to look at a face, leaves a little space in the way like a window. Again, this sense of both separation and clarity. I see you, I can't reach you, there's something between us. You're both disappearing, but also present for just a moment.
Leaves a space in the way like a window.
Yes.
He can't see anyone. He can't even see the work he's creating until he has space.
You make something, you represent something, and you have to spend time, of course, making it. And that, let's say if you were painting, or even in your case, or writing about your children, you have to not be with your children in order to represent your children. And so it's the losses.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa, for that performance. I'm hoping we will be able to hear your whole performance later. Those of you who know the wonderful show Sunday in the Park with George know that this song, Finishing the Hat, captures the struggle of Georges Seurat, the central protagonist, the struggle George undergoes to give passion, his full passion and devotion to his art, and also to pay attention to the outside world. And the song does take us into the transfixed and enraptured creative process of a great artist whose gazes on objects he sees as part of a composition and maybe not in themselves. This wonderful song also takes us into a work that is exploring in so many ways the mystery of artistic transformation, the way we use one art to understand another. That process by which we use painting to understand the world in front of us, and in the case of Sunday in the Park with George, the process by which Stephen Sondheim represents the mental and intellectual and creative world of a painter in music. That transformation and that transmogrification goes to the magic of art. So I wanted to talk with my guests for a little bit about that translation. And I thought maybe we could start with Melissa, who herself transforms the work of art. Melissa is often called, one of the very great, maybe the greatest. There are other Sondheim interpreters, and that act of interpretation, what goes into it? And maybe a way to ask you this question really pointedly is to ask you to think about a particular interpretive moment, maybe even in the lyrics we just heard, where you worked on changing something or adding something of your own?
Well, first of all, thank you that for having me. I am here to sing, and I will sing, and you know, people are putting together all the tech. So if anyone's wondering why we went to a flashback, it's just we're putting this all together. We'll have to see it like a pointillist painting ourselves.
Exactly.
And hope you'll see that we're throwing it all together. But so you're asking me if there's a moment in a Sondheim song where I put a special touch or something of my own into it to
Well,
interpret it.
you look at notes you look at words and notes, and you make them your own, right? Your art,
Yes.
your art changes this art, and that just as Sondheim turns strokes of paint into notes, you transform Sondheim.
Well, I think that, you know, all actors, we just breathe in the music and we try to stay vulnerable. I mean, the main thing for me with Sondheim is to just stay vulnerable to all the pathos and the sadness and then the irony and then the nasty, and just let all of it happen sometimes simultaneously. You know, don't get stuck in one frame of mind, because maybe what distinguishes people who are drawn to Sondheim are people who are willing to be fragile, to change their mind in the middle of a sentence, to want something and then to resent that they want it. You know, so by the time you get to the period of a sentence, you've said 5 different things and you meant all of them. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
well, that's exactly what I was thinking about, the flexibility of your interpretations, all the moods that kind of flicker in your voice and across your face. And you know, the song "Finishing the Hat" was written for a man.
Yeah.
And you're a woman, and I'm wondering what kind of interpretation happens there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I look at any clip of me singing "Finishing the Hat," and I'm afraid which clip you're going to show, because I have so many opinions about creativity. I have so much desire to get immersed in things. I have 3 small children myself, so I know how hard it is to push away the voices that come from through the window in order to become immersed. And then there's this element of guilt. And then there's this feeling that I can't really create until I'm sure everyone else is all right. And I'm not saying that all women are like me, but you know, maybe some people who are also mothers relate to that. It's very hard, you know, it's differently hard to be creatively absorbed as a woman. And maybe if a woman gets a chance to play that part, which I know Mr. Sondheim does not approve, I think I would love to have a crack at it, because I think it would be very illuminating for me to feel I could make that painting, and I could take the risks that George took to make that painting and to finish a hat. I got stuck at the very end of the song. I got stuck on starting on a hat. At the very end of the song, for the first time, George says, not just finishing the hat, starting on a hat, the thrill, right? For him, for me, it's like if I could just start. It's different, you know?
Absolutely. Finishing and starting. And
yeah,
thank you so much for that was the kind of distinction I
suffer to start. And I don't know that George Seurat suffers to start. He got his rocks off. I can get started. I wish I could do that, you know? So when I perform it, I might get maudlin sometimes because it's hard. I can't even believe how lucky I am when I can, you know, get transcendent.
And to be in the moment. You know, the best part is when you're not at the beginning and not at the end.
Yeah,
some ways,
I love it. And it's not that I don't get to do it. And it's not like my children are holding me down. They don't mean to, you know. It's just maybe I'm another generation. You know, every generation, as we're now learning, has a lot to learn.
Yeah.
So.
Well, isn't there in the song "Children in Art" too? There's that line about rapture and what artists capture.
Yeah, Yeah, I made a special live performance for you for
You can't. We
for
will
that. But yeah,
hear it soon.
the child is so sweet and the girls are so rapturous. Isn't it lovely how artists can capture us? And that song was reiterated in an interview with Stephen Sondheim, where he did say that there are two things that can immortalize a person: children and art. And he really believes that. And, you know, it's an ongoing theme in Mr. Sondheim's work that we die, but we don't. We disappoint, we disappear, we die, but we don't. And that's a big Sondheimian theme.
I want to come back to that theme, since that is an interpretation of that title, Children and Art, that I had not thought of. And that is so interesting and exciting. It's an odd title, Children and Art. But let's pause on that. I would like to ask Tedd, who played in our television episode. Tedd played for Raoul and also played for Melissa when they sang Finishing the Hat. And I'm wondering about your interpretation of this score, this play that is finished, but nevertheless, you were playing for a man singing the song, you're playing for a woman singing the song, you're playing for two different artists with two different ways of changing the work, of making it their own. How do you get into that act? In other words, say a word, if you wouldn't mind, about the kind of interpretation that you offer.
Well, I mean, superficially, there's just the differences between, I mean, Raoul sang it in G flat, which is the key that it's in the show, and Melissa sang it in, I think, D, you know. So just on the surface, there's some fundamental differences, and just, you know, in the key in the show, you know, there's all of this, you know, these thirds that you play with your right hand almost constantly in the body of the piece. And in G flat, they sit under your hands and it's very smooth. In other keys, you know, you have to you just have to move your hands a little differently. So there's just sort of the really pragmatic end of it, like that. But then the other thing I remember from playing it both with Melissa and Raoul on the show was trying to really also make like a line. So it wasn't just, you know, like me playing, you know, in one key for Melissa and then another key for Raoul, but also with Melissa's, to try and give it. I think with Raoul's, I tried to make it a much more conventional read on the song. Really didn't stray off the page at all. With Melissa's version, I started to get into a little of what we were doing with the Sondheim Sublime record, where I was in some cases going off the page a little bit, and trying to play, you know, just adding some voices and stuff that were maybe a little bit more my own, that kind of thing. Melissa and I did this on Sondheim Sublime on a few songs, like what we did with the song I Remember. A lot of that is sort of my own sort of interpretation and reimagining of the harmonic structure of the song. I did a little of that with Melissa's version of Finishing the Hat, whereas with Raoul's, I tried to stay a little bit more just close to the musical text, and deliver more of the version that you would, you know, hear in the show.
Thank you so much. That really adds to this picture. We are assembling a sort of collage of very dynamic elements that, a little bit like Seurat's painting, where you know, he has placed these dots on the canvas, and yet they vibrate, they move, they buzz in relation to each other, and that aliveness of the work of art is something I've been privileged to watch all of you, you, Tedd, Raoul, and Melissa, watch you assemble in this little ensemble interpretation of Sondheim. Since we have Adam here, I would really like to ask Adam a kind of nerdy question about not my nerdiness, not yours, Adam.
Mine is unlimited, Elisa, so you can always plummet. Plummet steps.
About lyrics in the American song, written in rhymed, often written in rhyme, and poetry. And I'd like, since I have a show called Poetry in America, and I should admit, in a not terribly rigorous way, what I try to do in each season is to do one show where verse performed becomes the theme of the show, without my always asking in a really rigorous way, well, is our song lyrics poetry? Is hip hop poetry? So I'd love your nerdy answer to the relationship of Sondheim lyrics to poetry.
How nerdy do you want it, Elisa? I can give you minimally nerdy. I think, one of the ways that one can think about this is if you think about verse, right? Poetry covers a huge variety of ways of writing and thinking, but one of the crucial ways that we know it's poetry is because it's verse. It has a meter, organization, rhyme very often. But there is a difference between writing verse of the Shakespearean kind or any other kind and writing a song lyric. There's a famous story, or at least it's famous, or maybe it isn't even famous. It's obscure. There's an obscure story about the American musical theater, because probably the greatest versifier, I think you probably agree, Elisa, of the 20th century in English was W.H. Auden, great poet. My son is named after him. And he, at one point, attempted to write the original lyrics for the show Man of La Mancha, famous show that has Impossible Dream in it. You can look at the lyrics, and they didn't work, not because they weren't great. Auden was incapable of writing badly, but because they required the kind of dense concentration that we typically give to verse. And the thing about a lyric for the musical theater, even at the highest level that Stephen Sondheim practices, is that it's completely linear. You don't have time to stop and either appreciate or analyze, and you have no time to look back. It has to move forward in a completely linear and indeed accelerated way. And the great interpreters like Raoul and Melissa can help us pause, and by their diction and reading and interpretation, feel the change of emotion within the line. But we as listeners don't have the same opportunity that we have as readers to stop, pause, and go back. Another thing that I think that's true about Stephen Sondheim particularly is that he has, for all that he works very proudly and even emphatically and even intolerantly within the confines of American musical theater writing, Steve is obsessive about what we call true rhyme. In other words, that each rhyme has to be exactly sounding like the one before it. In most modern verses, you know very well, talking about Elizabeth Bishop, we love half rhyme, near rhyme, assonance, sounds on the ends of adjacent lines that are similar but not exactly alike.
Just gotten officially nerdy.
Good. All right. That's what you said. I'm giving you the full nerd. You got me in against my bookshelf, and I'm going all out. We like Elizabeth Bishop or Auden. We like that kind of thing. Sondheim regards that as absolutely verboten, forbidden. You can't go stray from pure rhyme with Sondheim. And it's an interesting thing, I think, Elisa, because it's one of the reasons why in the few conversations I've had, one terrific one on stage with Steve Sondheim, he's very allergic to post-1964, post-Dylan and Beatles popular music, because it doesn't have that kind of formal discipline. But what's fascinating for me as a huge fan both of Joni Mitchell and of Steve Sondheim is that Steve, for all that he talks relentlessly about only organizing his songs around the character and the scene, around the demands of the particular, in fact has a body of personal expression that's every bit as confessional and fingerprint personal as anything of Joni Mitchell's or Leonard Cohen's. You know, if you think about the great Sondheim songs, they're always, even though they may be set in 19th century Paris or 20th century Sweden or one floor above a human meat pie making factory, they're all sung by people who desperately long for connection, like Georges Seurat in this one, desperately long for connection, have all the capacities in the world, artistic, personal, and of sensitivity, but are incapable of making that final leap to human connection, being alive, sorry, grateful, finishing the hat, even a hit song like Going, Going, Gone or Send in the Clowns. They're all, in a certain sense, if not the same song, they're all about the same signature emotion of Steve Sondheim. So in those two ways, in having a persistent voice that penetrates many different characters and in insisting on a particular kind of formal verse, those are the places, I think, where Sondheim's lyrics, even though they have to conform to the basic demands of a song, that is never to stop for you to think about them while they're being sung, are truly poetry.
That was, I'm glad I asked for the full nerd. It was fantastic. I would add, and in 1 second, we're going to hear Melissa sing for us again. But I would add, as a relatively new student of Sondheim and your pupil, the pupil of all of you, that even though the experiential, in the moment verse has to be immediately apprehended by someone in the audience, the works of themselves are great enough that the parts of the songs continue to speak to each other, and the songs then speak to each other. And so there's a kind of larger architecture and a set of ideas as well as feelings. And so that's my nerdy
I think that's
coda.
I think that's totally true. I just would add to it that, like, every artist engages in purposeful misdirection. They tell us, here's what I'm doing, when in fact we need to know you're not exactly doing the thing always that you're doing. And
Right.
he can only work by immersing himself in a theatrical situation, but his songs transcend the specifics of the theatrical situation and therefore become the perfect material for variation and recital.
And it's almost like George just looking at the hat.
Right.
Sondheim just looking at the hat, he might not understand that he has been talking about all hats.
He understands it. He understands it. He just doesn't want to entirely confess to it.
Okay. All right. So I would love to hear the very, very beautiful children and art that Melissa mentioned a little bit earlier. And Adam, as Melissa gets ready, could you say a little bit about where Children and Art sits in Sunday in the Park with George?
Sure. Sunday in the Park with George is a strange musical in one way, which is it's two totally discrete acts, which its creators, Sondheim and James Lapine, struggled to put together. The first act is, I think, the most perfect thing in all of American musical theater. It includes finishing the hat, and it's about the making of the great painting, the Grand Jatte, Sunday on the Grand Jatte. The second act takes place, is set in contemporary America. It's where George's great-great-grandson is doing contemporary work, which this song references, and Dot's great-granddaughter is now an old lady herself and is talking about it. So it's an attempt to connect the first act's art making with contemporary art making. I will confess in a heretical way that, as I say, I think the first act of Sunday in the Park is the single greatest thing in American musical theater. The second act is a little bit more unsure, but it rises to this great 11 o'clock. And 11 o'clock is the term of art in the musical theater for the number that comes right before the curtain that sums up thematically everything the show has been about. And God knows there is no more beautiful 11 o'clock summing up the themes of Sunday in the Park with George than Children and Art, which tells us the meaning of everything we've been experiencing.
Yes, let's hear Children and Art.
You would have liked him, Mama, you would. Mama, he makes things, Mama, they're good. Just as you said from the start, children and art, children and art. He should be happy, Mama, he's blue. What do I do? You should have seen it. It was a sight. Mama, I mean it. All color and light. I don't understand what it was, but Mama, the things that he does, they twinkle and shimmer and buzz. You would have liked them. It. Him. Isn't she beautiful? There she is, there she is, there she is, there she is. Mama is everywhere. He must have loved her so much. This is our family, this is the lot. After I go, this is all that you've got, honey. Wasn't she beautiful though? You would have liked her. Mama did things no one had done. Mama was funny. Mama was fun. Mama spent money when she had none. Mama said, honey, mustn't be blue. It's not so much do what you like as it is that you like what you do. Mama said, darling, don't make such a drama. A little less thinking, a little more feeling. I'm just quoting Mama. The child is so sweet and the girls are so rapturous. Isn't it lovely how artists can capture us? Oh, you would have liked her. Honey, I'm wrong. You would have loved her. Mama enjoyed things. Mama was smart. See how she shimmers. I mean from the heart. I know, honey, you don't agree, but this is our family tree. Just wait till we're there and you'll see. Listen to me. Mama was smart. Listen to Mama. Children and art. Children and art.
is terrible not to be able to be full of a room of people clapping and moved to that 11 o'clock. Melissa is going to get herself ready. And what I am so struck by in having just watched that performance is also the interpretation ventured by Melissa in A Mirror, where we see what she does not quite see, what she does not see. And the fragmentation and the jumble of perspectives that is that stamps this whole show, Sunday in the Park with George, in some ways was just captured by Melissa's singing of that beautiful song, but also of how she set herself in physical space, and that was kind of nerdy too. But I'm wondering if we could talk about how difficult that song is, and maybe ask Melissa how she has come to understand it. And maybe, Melissa, did you think about putting yourself in that window? In that mirror?
Oh, I did. I admit, I did. I had 2 occasions to prepare to sing. I have 2 things going on this week, and I thought of how I could possibly set 2 Sondheim songs. And the other song that I've been preparing and performing, getting ready for a gala, celebrating Sondheim with Raoul, actually, is to sing "Send in the Clowns." And so I prepared I thought, oh, the mirror was there, and I thought, oh, that might be interesting. And I also was given many years ago by a fan who's a great collector. I was given those statuettes that are behind me on my shelf right there. And those are statuettes from the Ceramic Art Studio in Madison, Wisconsin from 1946. And they are the statues of comedy and tragedy. And they're very, very valuable collector's items. And I thought it was interesting to sing "Send in the Clowns" with comedy and tragedy. And then I have tragedy actually in the mirror. But I also thought it would work for children in art because she's assessing herself, her mother, and it's played by the same actress, in a painting. So when I played the part, I remember being in a wheelchair and always referencing an image. But the image was of myself because I'm the actress, the same actress who played Dot. So all those lines being blurred of the reflection of oneself and one's youth, as both for Desiree and for all things, I'm watching the transition. So I thought the mirror, is very profound and might just create something. I do like to put special things on bookshelves.
Yes, and I mean you are a singer, but we saw you working in this other art form, doing that very translation that we were talking about before. That just where music becomes visual art and visual art becomes music. But back to the mirror, and I'd love if Adam and Tedd would jump in. The mirror cuts only a piece, cuts you in 2, like a little modernist collage.
Now, Adam, you're an art history guy, and you're a major art history guy, but I was an art history major in college, and I remember it was always significant when there was a reflective surface in a painting. So if you were analyzing that, I didn't really do it with any deliberate outcome in mind, but what do you think?
Thank you. I'm being put on the nerd spot. Well, the women are wedding makeup. It's obviously it's one of the great themes in art, but it's particularly one of the great themes in art that has something to do with fashion. Finishing the hat. One of the things that's about is that it's a very specific hat. It's not a hat on a street urchin. It's a hat on a society woman who's out in the park on a promenade. One of the things I think you can't emphasize enough, and that I'm sure Steve and James were aware of as they worked on it, is that, as I was saying at the beginning of our broadcast, Elisa, and I think it's worth reiterating, there's a very particular politics to the painting of the Groundhog that isn't always apparent, and that is that it's not about the classical world. It's not about the world of rhetorical gestures. You think of a great revolutionary painting like David's Oath of the Horatii, where everybody's lifting up a sword. Right. This is all about trying to find poise, style, order, light, design, perfection in a completely ordinary scene of ordinary Parisians on a Sunday in an ordinary park, not even a particularly elegant park, and finding in that scene all of the color, beauty, and light that the world offers to us. And that was a very profound political desire on the part of the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist generation, saying, let's look away from the ruins of the Tuileries Palace, which were still smoldering in the middle of Paris. Let's look away from all of the oppressive past that creates violence and turmoil in our lives, and let's begin to define our own lives in terms of the immediate, the tangible, the accessible, and the real. And I think that in a way that in the only way artists don't work by analytic thought, they work by intuitive leaps. I think that that Sondheim understood that finishing the hat wasn't just finishing a hat, that it was devoting yourself in a way that was genuinely sacred to a completely secular object. And I think that that's part of the pathos and beauty of the piece, part of the pathos and beauty of the Groundhog as a painting. I remember years and years ago, since you asked, that I actually was in Chicago, where that painting lives, giving a lecture about the Groundhog. And as I looked at it, and it was in the company of many, God forgive me, but many a tiresome art historian trying to decode the picture as though it were a puzzle rather than a work of art. And I said to myself, Sondheim understands that picture better than anyone. Sondheim understands that picture because he understands that it's made up of all of these incredibly tiny and yet specific choices, these dots, literally. And at the same time, it's a picture where suddenly, how does Errico, help me, Melissa, people standing in the park, in a small suburban park on an island in a river.
Yeah.
And it's all the beauty of the we can hope to find in the world. And I thought, Sondheim, the art historians are searching for this picture. Sondheim understands it.
Well, we used that idea when you helped me to script my concerts. The idea that the island of the Groundhog was a place where people of all kinds came together in peace and harmony. People from different backgrounds. It was a kind of vision, and that was
beautiful classicism. A monumental quality. The sort of outline we see around all of this complex diversity.
And all the anger and all the bickering and all the people who are arguing. And as they start, I remember being an actor and all the characters, squabbling, and then we would find our spot. And eventually we all got still. And we were all so moved we could barely stand it. To all unite in one frame.
And you are describing the particular pathos of the song you just sang as well, that seems to teeter between moods and between styles. And maybe, Ted, we hear a kind of blues almost, right? There's lyricism and discord. And could you talk about the what I would call a sort of fragmentation or disparateness in that beautiful song that nevertheless is all brought together by the end and by the voice, of course, by Melissa's voice?
Yeah, it's an interesting song in as much as, the setup is it's got this very sort of serene sounding accompaniment, very simple, very consonant, and it goes on that way for a little while. The melody is very, the melody is
absolutely.
But then he starts introducing, like you said, these notes, which like you picked up astutely. They're actually they you got that first one. I'm just gonna hold on.
Yeah.
In most songs like that wouldn't work, but he makes it work. It's this longing. It's the blues. You said it. That's what it is. And like I said, in a lot of other songs that would sound, but the fact that he introduces that when he does, you're not shocked by it, but you definitely take notice of it. And then he starts working more of it in, and working more of it into the accompaniment, and then towards the end works it back out again. So it's interesting.
Yeah, this extraordinary, and it isn't a balancing so much. It's a little more turbulent than that, of this melodic, lulling beauty, and something that's much more jagged, that also reminds us of the contrast between a working class scene, a democratic scene, and unruly politics, and the art that's able to see it all. I would love to hear from, we only have a few minutes, and we're going to hear another beautiful, at least one other beautiful song, but I would like to hear some thoughts on why call this song Children and Art. Melissa has already said that Sondheim said that the two things, I guess the two great things we can produce are children and art.
To immortalize
yourself.
Yes.
Any other? That was not the reading I had, so I'm wondering if there are any others.
I'm eager to hear yours, Elisa.
Well, I was thinking that they sound like they don't belong together. It's a sort of collage-y sort of title, Children and Art. I don't know. No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I really.
Well, the basic way that Sondheim organizes almost all of his work through contradiction. Can I just add a point, because
I was hoping you'd jump in with.
Ted, hit that blue note. It's just a reminder. It's useful to have always that exactly when American musical theater began to emancipate itself from European operetta is when it embraced the blues, when it began to use the African American music as its foundation and its skeleton. And it's beautiful to see how that persists even to a work as seemingly as far removed from a showboat or from Gershwin as this one. It's a wonderful reminder of what the grammar of American musical theater is. But it's certainly true that Sondheim always works through contradiction and opposition. Sorry, Grateful, maybe his most perfect lyric describing a marriage, right? You're always sorry, you're always grateful. Again and again, it's always about opposition. And certainly it's true that when we first hear this thing, we expect it to be one more opposition, right? You can either have children or you can make art. And that's very much Dot's predicament in Act 1 of Sunday in the Park, right? She can either be with Georges, who is interesting but not interested in her sufficiently, or she can be with Louis, who's not at all interesting but is only interested in her. And those are the kinds of choices among contradictions that Steve's characters have to make. But in this case, and it's one of the things that makes it the climactic song of it, you expect opposition and you get concord, because what Dot's granddaughter is singing is about those are the two things that we are left with. And it's doubly, I think, touching for those of us who are family people, because Steve doesn't have children. He's a childless man who has made no secret of the enormous difficulties and conflicts he had with his own mother growing up. That's something he talks about overtly and openly. So I think that we also feel in it the poignance of desire, right? It would be great if you could have children and art. Georges Seurat is going only to have art and he's never going to have children. But in the final hymn in the show, we're told the dream would be to have both legacies, to be able to make something beautiful that lasts in the world and to be able to create someone beautiful who takes you forward in the world. I think that's one of the reasons why we cherish that song.
Yeah, very. I'm so glad I'm so glad you decided to jump in with that. I also find the song this much I have figured out the way that things are realized over time that may not be within a particular lifetime or a particular historical moment. The perspectives that this great-granddaughter is able to harvest were inaccessible to those in the first act. And there is a sort of statement about, I think, about how our children may understand us and forgive us, and that larger perspective that the artist has in parallel to that larger perspective that the artist has. Of course, the bitter truth is that we have to die before we before we gain that wisdom, before we see the full picture. And that is why Melissa's beautiful staging of herself in that mirror, where we could see a part of her that she would never see, moved me so much. We are almost at the end, and I am told that we do now have Melissa's full performance of Finishing the Hat, which we can listen to now. We also have another we were thinking of using, and we'll see if maybe there's desire for an encore, and we may play that as well. So let's listen to right now to Melissa's full performance of Finishing the Hat. I hope.
Yes, he looks for me. Good. Let him look for me to tell me why he left me, as I always knew he would. I had thought he understood. They have never understood, and no reason that they should. But if anybody could, finishing the hat, how you have to finish the hat, how you watch the rest of the world from a window while you finish the hat, mapping out a sky, what you feel like planning a sky, what you feel when voices that come through the window go until they distance and die, until there's nothing but sky, and how you're always turning back too late from the grass or the stick or the dog or the light, how the kind of man who's willing to wait's not the kind that you want to find waiting to return you to the night, dizzy from the height, coming from the hat, studying the hat, entering the world of the hat, reaching through the world of the hat like a window, back to this one from that, studying a face, stepping back to look at a face, leaves a little space in the way, like a window, but to see, it's the only way to see. And when the lover that you wanted goes, you can say to yourself, well, I give what I give, but the lover who won't wait for you knows that however you live, there's a part of you always standing by, mapping out the sky. a hat, starting on a hat, finishing a hat. Look, I made a hat. Where there never was a hat.
Oh, thank you so much, Melissa. I really heard that starting and the difficulty of starting. Thanks so thanks so much for sharing it. We even though we are almost out of time, we're hearing interest in that we go a little more and hear another song, and hear the chat from beyond our beyond us, and as well as our chat is voting for Move On, and so it's very wonderful. But I'm wondering if you, Ted, perhaps would say why should we end with Move On? Why should we finish with Move On?
That's me?
Well, if you don't want to, you don't have to, but
you got like two of the best talkers in the world, and you asked me?
I don't know, you were good. You were really good.
You actually know something, Ted. You actually know something.
Picked on you.
All right, I'll throw out something quick and then turn it over to the professionals.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, and this is just a very quick personal thing, watching Melissa sing Finishing the Hat just now made me really miss playing music. I mean, I play music, and I've been making videos with Melissa and other people, and that's fun and everything. It's not the same, and then to see something like that, and it reminded me, because that was recorded quite a while ago, and I hadn't thought of it in a long time, and hearing it, it's funny how like you hear something and it brings you back to the room, and it's like, listen, we've been talking the last few weeks about doing Finishing the Hat, and it's been all very abstract. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that gig, but then I hear it and I'm like, wow, I can almost smell what the room smelled like.
There was a perfectionism about that that day that Melissa wanted to get it right. And our sound people wanted to get it right, and there was an artistic imperative that was guiding us all.
But I remember Raul was in the room, and I mean we did 2 takes or 1 take. I mean, but we were so ready. But Raul was a little to the left, standing with you, Adam. So we were all there together. I remember it too, Ted, and I remember being on that stage with Raul right out of the frame of the camera, and Ted and I worked hard to be ready for that because we'd never done that song before. We were those were our first ideas. What I miss about the work I would do with Ted is that he and I are always searching psychologically through this music. So every performance, I might cry, I might be so lost that Ted has to wait. And he has to fill, and he feels me. I don't know how he does because we're usually a little bit to the side, I always have him as close as I can, but we read each other like you can't, and we've been doing it for years and all over the world. So I miss you too, Ted. You're going to make me cry.
Well, anyway,
yeah.
So I don't really have a good reason other than Move On is a wonderful song and a great way. I don't really have any kind of, I'll let you guys.
Well, we often finish the show with it, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adam, why is it right that we finish up with Move On, aside from the fact that
it's still to be the analytic intellectual, right? The artist alone and the analytic intellectual has to analyze. It's a great song. It's a summation of I think, of Sondheim's view about the process of making art, which is that it's an insatiable appetite for the new and an insatiable appetite for renewal, and not for praise, not for approval, not for the nod of one's time, which you'll never get, but for the sheer act and the energy of creation and making. And that's what it contributes to.
Yes.
Let's
That's an art form, Adam. That's art. Your art. That's art.
Yes.
Well, it's a joy to have been on that stage with three artists like Raoul, Melissa, and Ted, and to have to stand back and be the umpire instead of the player is a deep source of perpetual disappointment to the highbrow in the room.
I'll play for you. I'll play Adam. If you start singing, I'll play for you any day.
That's a deal, Ted. That's a deal, Ted. Sondheim unsublime. We'll call the record. Sondheim pedestrian.
Oh,
Sondheim humiliations.
fine.
Everybody's pursuing their amateur dreams here
That's
in
true, right?
quarantine. And so you too, Adam, could make an album, just like we have friends whose children made a golf course in their backyard.
Yeah,
Well,
look, I'm making dinner.
Yes,
Trust me.
That's my art. That's my art form that I will add to. But Move On is a beautiful song in a way. I will add only, and as a moment of mailer-like self-advertisement, that actually an album of songs that I have written, or wrote the words to, is just going to be released in the next month, and we'll put it out on social media, and Melissa stars on it. And so I have a little entree into the world of lyrical self-expression.
Well, we will all buy it and hope there's a truck to deliver it, or some means of getting it to us. So I would love to hear Move On. I do want to say before we go that if you would like to see the whole television episode in which Melissa and Raoul and Adam, as well as some other wonderful actors and singers appear, you can stream that episode and others on our website, poetryinamerica.org, or you can watch it on your local PBS station. The whole series is running, both season 2 and season 1, now that we're all at home during the day with our children. You can watch all 20 episodes. But now I think we should close with Melissa.
Stop worrying where you're going. Move on. If you can know where you're going, you've gone. Just keep moving on. I chose and my world was shaken. So what? The choice may have been mistaken. The choosing was not. You have to move on. Look at what you want, not at where you are, not at what you'll be. Look at all the things you've done for me. Opened up my eyes, taught me how to see, notice every tree, understand the light, concentrate on now, move on, move on. Stop worrying if your vision is new. Let others make that decision. They usually do. You keep moving on. Look at what you've done, then at what you want, not at where you are, what you'll be. Look at all the things you gave to me. Let me give to you something in return. I would be so pleased come from you, then it will be new. Give us more to see.
I'm told that that song is the artist's credo, and one can certainly understand why, as we are gathered into a kind of rapturous embrace with an artist whose heart is entirely open. I've learned a lot about art history and about Stephen Sondheim and the emotional core of his work from my friends Melissa Errico and Adam Gopnik and Tedd. And I want to thank the Sheen Center and all of you who have commented online and who have gathered in the middle of an afternoon to enjoy poetry, this live episode of Poetry in America at the Sheen Center. Thank you so much.